how many times I have had to talk to Matt Lech about his picking up people.
Drunk pilot behavior.
Exactly. There's been many occasions where Matt Lech has offended such luminaries as Britt Weinstein and other luminaries, also members of the Republican Minnesota Party, who just have lost the control of the state, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those guys were deep in the bag for Rick Jensen, thinking he was going to ride COVID denial to the governorship in Minnesota. What a very state with a lot of medical professionals.
So now here is Matt Lech now deciding to pick on poor Matt Walsh. Now, understand, before we put that up there, hold on. Let me just say why I think this is particularly cruel of you, Matt. Because Matt Walsh recently was utterly humiliated on the Joe Rogan show when he, as ostensibly, I mean, the guy has dedicated his entire program that he has on the Daily Wire, and it seems like his life, to fighting what he calls the trans ideology and saving the children from things like gender affirming care. And he has presented himself as some type of expert, a documentarian.
Yeah, traveling the globe for information, scouring all different nations for an anthropological study and a scientific one.
The months of research and interviewing that you must involve in doing a documentary. And then he goes on to Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan, with one question, completely humiliates and embarrasses Matt Walsh, who makes up some number, I think he said in the millions of people who are, of kids who are getting some type of, puberty blockers. And he gets it completely wrong. I mean, it was really, really humiliating.
He said 7 figures, it's actually 3.
Okay, yeah. Well, listen, the bottom line is, Matt, I think a lot of people would say you're being a little bit mean to pick on Matt Walsh. And point out the fact that he once again humiliated himself. Put it up there. This is really, sometimes, Matt, you're just so
It's cruel.
So,
it's
yeah.
cruel.
This is, so five hours ago, Matt Walsh tweeted this morning, most Americans are wildly dissatisfied with the direction of the country, but Republicans weren't able to harness that dissatisfaction. This speaks to a party without any kind of coherent or compelling national message. We need new leadership, top to bottom. And I just...
So wait, so in other words, he's complaining this morning that the Republican Party does not have a coherent or compelling national message.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And then wait, what did he write before the election results were in?
Yeah, I replied with an image of his tweet from last night before the results were coming in, or maybe some of the early ones from Florida were coming in, and he said... The pollsters may not be asking about it, but there's no doubt that the Democratic Party was partly doomed by its decision to go all in on gender ideology. We successfully made this a losing political issue for them.
Now, by we, he's talking about himself, probably. And he's saying, but wait, I want to stay on those words for a second because it's really important to understand what he's saying. We successfully made this a losing political issue for them. In other words, we, he, and the Republican Party were successful in coalescing the Republican Party against being anti-gender ideology. It's sort of a made-up thing, but when he says that, he says, trying to ban gender-affirming care for kids and people. I think he would also argue.
Yeah,
and they were successful at it.
Now, successfully.
How can you be successful at something, a project that big? And then within 16 hours, you find out that you weren't successful.
It's tough, especially when people are going to be looking at who failed us and who misled us in terms of these campaigns. And you said, you're the one, Matt Walsh, who launched this documentary, made this one of the central issues of the Republican Party, and it flopped.
I mean, but what if?
But what about Florida?
Okay, what about Florida?
Come on.
So yeah, I responded. Actually, go into Matt Walsh's tweet there, the one that The second, yeah. So I responded. I said, "Sorry, your anti-trans hysteria shit flopped." And Matt Walsh, who I've responded to a number of times, but he's never been sensitive enough to actually reply.
Well, I mean, to be fair, he is so humiliated from his time on the Rogan show that he's probably sensitive to these things.
So he replied, remember when Ron DeSantis went all in against the groomers and the trans indoctrinators and then proceeded to win by 20 points and flip his entire state red while also winning the Latino vote and taking entire Democrat voting blocks away from them? I remember that. And I replied, you can just scroll down a little bit. I said, sorry, it flopped everywhere but Florida.
Just an asterisk, right? I mean, we're fair here. You're fair. You're going to correct it and make sure it's a specific critique.
I mean, well, but maybe what his point is that none of the other Republicans were talking about trans issues. Like maybe Doug Mastriano, who was actually introduced legislation prohibiting pediatric gender transition surgeries. Maybe he didn't talk about it. Or maybe Kelly Lake. Maybe she didn't talk about
Lake,
it.
Yeah.
Carrie Lake. Or maybe Baldock didn't talk about it.
Blake Masters.
Or maybe Blake Masters never talked about it. I mean, every single Republican in the country was talking about it. He was successful, to be fair, in getting, and maybe it's not just him, but certainly he was part of that effort, getting every single Republican candidate running for office, maybe even even state comptrollers, to talk about trans issues. In that respect, he was successful. But in terms of the American population, the citizenry of America, they just thought like, who are these sex pests?
Well,
what's wrong with them?
Yeah, they seem weird.
What?
Yeah, I mean, and perhaps Matt Walsh's obsession with it, which causes him to inflate the numbers of the amount of kids receiving hormone therapy to the millions when it's really in the mid thousands over a multi-year period. Maybe that did not necessarily translate his delusions about that to people who just don't see that as an issue in their lives. They may know a trans person, they may know a trans kid. Nothing's a takeover in the way that he's framing it, because he's just wrong on the raw numbers.
I mean, to be fair to Matt Walsh, who did again get completely humiliated by Joe Rogan with just one question, which is impressive. He also has basically exploited this issue to make himself a lot of money. And sometimes when you get caught in that bubble, particularly when you're just working at a place that's just full of transphobes, it's easy to misinterpret the way that normal human beings are going to react to your pet issue. So I think you got to be fair, Matt.
Okay.
In that respect.
While we're talking about my tweets, this one also, Chris Rufo asked, what's the deal with Arizona? And I don't know, maybe it's because people like Chris Rufo promoted Blake Masters at fundraisers and things like that. Like, that's not a person that people relate to, apparently.
No.
I just think you should be a little more sensitive the way that Matt Walsh is feeling.
I want to be mean to Matt Walsh. I think it's fun.
Yeah, well.
All right, okay.
I think it's a public service.
Yeah.
Don't say it on there.
It's not just how it makes Matt Walsh feel, but I think it's a public service to message, like, being mean to Matt Walsh is the appropriate thing to do to Matt Walsh.
I think absolutely. I think the more humiliation that he gets on Twitter, I think it's healthy for him. Let's put it that way.